really mean if the president played a more direct role in it?
Well, I think there's been some analysis of this, and what the bottom line is, when you take away some of the independence of the Federal Reserve, you end up with worse outcomes. That's just the sort of long and the short of it. Some people have found higher prices or slower growth. Ultimately, one of the hallmarks of the American economy, one of the strengths of the American economy has been the separation of fiscal policy and monetary policy and the independence of the Federal Reserve. And that gives a certain amount of certainty to the business community, to workers, to families. And I think that would be a very dangerous thing to take away from.
We talked to Scott Bessent about this the other day right here at this table, Key Square Group, close economic advisor to Donald Trump. He said he's just talking. Everybody gets a chance to talk. Elizabeth Warren gets to say what she wants about interest rates. Why would the president be any different?
Donald Trump is running for president. Elizabeth Warren is not. And there is a responsibility that comes with that task. Then that kind of erratic approach to economic policy making, I think, flows throughout all of what you saw today, actually, in the interview. A little bit all over the place. He would say one thing and then talk about something else that was a little bit scattered. Yeah. And honestly, at the end of the day, what you really want is that certainty that the president is not going to interfere with monetary policy. That is going to create more crises, more uncertainty that is just not good for the economy.
So if we're dealing in things that are certain here, could you say, Michael, to Wall Street and to those that are paying attention to economic matters, that it is a certainty that no matter who wins this election, the deficit is likely to go up, potentially as a result, inflation is likely to be more persistent?
I actually don't think that's a certainty. I think you have two very different approaches to thinking about fiscal policy in the budgets. I think you have one approach with Donald Trump who says, let's cut taxes for rich people, for corporations. Let's double down on those same failed tax cuts that he did in the first term. That's something we can look at and see how those went. But then, of course, as you know, he's thrown out tax cut over tax cut over tax cut over and over again. Mm-hmm. Partially offset by higher taxes, essentially, on middle-class families through tariffs. That's who would pay the tariffs.
And growth, he suggests.
He says growth, but of course that's always what people who say, let's give tax cuts to the people at the top, it'll trickle down to everybody else. That never really happens. On the other hand, you do have Kamala Harris, who has said she's going to reduce the deficit, and she does have a plausible path towards that by raising taxes on rich people and corporations. The specifics of that are going to matter, no question. There's a range of possible outcomes, but she has a plausible path toward reducing the deficit, and nobody thinks that Donald Trump has a plausible path towards that.
To reducing the deficit, even as the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which John Micklethwait presented Donald Trump with his own numbers, I think they were closer to $3 trillion added to the deficit under Kamala Harris's plan. Are we in a world where it's lesser of two evils then?
No, I think, and that analysis also had a scenario where it's paid for, everything she does is paid for, and there was no such scenario for Donald Trump. And obviously, we don't know exactly how these policies will play out, but if you zoom way out and just ask yourself, which of these two candidates has a plausible set of policies that will actually raise revenue, which is the fundamental challenge we have in the federal budget? Kamala Harris does have that, from raising the corporate tax rate, raising taxes on the top rate on individuals. Donald Trump's plan will dramatically reduce taxes on people at the top, costing trillions of dollars over the next 10 years. Tariffs might offset a little bit of that, but again, who's paying those tariffs? It's middle-class families, it's low-income families. That's not a great economic approach for growth.
Something else that Donald Trump was asked about today is the dollar as the world's reserve currency. He contends that none of his policies would put that at risk. He suggested if you want to turn into a third world country, lose your status as a reserve currency. What do you think realistically does happen with the dollar if these proposals come to fruition?
I think it's interesting that he referenced the third world in this particular case, because one of the hallmarks of the American economy and the strength of the American economy is that we don't do crony capitalism, or we try very hard not to, right? We should have rules of the road that everybody follows, and everybody knows those rules, and then the best business wins. They outcompete each other. But part of Donald Trump's plan is these very high tariffs and then exceptions. You heard him talk about this today in the interview, that he would give exceptions to people who asked for them. So the people who know him, who are close to him, who have influence with him, would get some of those exceptions. I think the quickest way to undermine the strength of the American economy is to start having, whoever gets to be closest, whoever's nicest to Donald Trump gets the special the special arrangement. And you heard him talk about this today. He likes Elon Musk, but he doesn't like Google because Google is mean to him. That's not a great way to make economic policy.
Didn't have great things to say about EVs, though, even if he likes Elon Musk.
Mr. Musk thought about that.
Talk to us about this perception on Wall Street, then, that Donald Trump would be friendlier to investors. Is it as simple as a lower corporate tax rate, or is it more complicated than that? He wants to give spoonful of sugar. Kamala Harris wants Wall Street to eat its vegetables.
Look, I think it is hard for Wall Street to look at these two candidates, one who is saying let's raise corporate taxes, let's raise taxes on investment income, and another who's saying let's cut taxes for those very same things. They like the lower taxes. They've always liked the lower taxes. But what I would say to them is, at the end of the day, what really drives business is customers. Customers drive business. And which of these two candidates has a plan to grow the middle class, which is where the American customer base is? The engine of economic prosperity is everyday workers, everyday customers. And ultimately, giving tax cuts directed at those folks is really where the business growth will come from.
Well, and not all those customers and workers you're referring to actually have legal status in this country. Immigration is something else that coalesces with the economy here. As Donald Trump is advocating for mass deportation potentially of millions of people, what will the actual economic effect of that be immediately, potentially before any kind of reform to the legal immigration system can get through?
I think it's a great question, and I think to zoom way out and think about how Donald Trump manages crises, that's really what you're asking, is how is the chief executive of this country going to manage through difficult things? And we've seen what happens when Donald Trump tries to manage through difficult things with COVID, and even more recently in the last few weeks with these hurricanes, in creating misinformation and stoking fear. That is not a recipe for calm, useful, productive economic stewardship. I think mass deportation fits in that same bucket. Now, listen, we can have a conversation about better immigration policy, and I think the vice president has been very clear that she wants a safe and secure border. But Donald Trump was president for 4 years, and he says he wants a safe and secure border. He wants people to come here legally, but he didn't do a single thing to improve the system to allow people to come here legally. And so that is really a lot of just words from him.